Hello, my name is Matt Piper. I'm a recovering alcoholic, a recovering addict, a recovering codependent, a recovering perfectionist. What I suffer from is the disease of shame, in which there's no cure, but it can be put in remission based on me staying in my fit spiritual condition and the daily maintenance of my 12-step program. Um, Addiction for me didn't really begin until I was quite a bit older. In high school, kids would drink and go to parties and things like that, but for some reason that was never my thing or my scene, and it wasn't until many years later, and I still remember the first day that I went and got a prescription for what I was feeling. So it was September 10th, 2001. So that Monday morning, I remember going in and telling the doctor, and I had depression, I had anxiety, and I couldn't sleep. And I remember a friend or somebody told me you should go get checked out for that. And I did, and I just went in and I just simply said to the doctor, like, I can't sleep, I'm depressed, I'm like super anxious. And I remember his response was every time I said that, he would write something down, write something down, write something down. And what I realized later, what he was doing was writing down prescriptions. So I said the word depression, he writes down antidepressant, anxiety, another, benzo, and then sleeping, another benzo, and hands it to me. And I remember thinking at that time, it's like, wow, depression, anxiety, and I can't sleep, there's a chemical solution to those issues. And in hindsight, when I look back at it, I kind of wish he would have said, well, why can't you sleep? Why are you depressed? Why are you anxious? But that was never discussed. It was just simply, here's a chemical solution to your problems. And that really started me on the road of addiction. And it was about 2 short years later where I had pretty much began to lose everything, and was in full-blown addiction, trying to get my drug of choice. And as a result, got me in some legal issue and some legal trouble. And so with the prodding of the Davis County legal system, kind of helped me see the light, so to speak, on that. And so I spent a little time in drug court. I'd had a relapse while I was in drug court and realized they weren't testing me for my drug of choice. And as any good addict would know, that's a green light of I won't be as bad or I won't do as much. And of course, it was in a matter of a couple of months that I was off to the races again. And in fact, I remember getting arrested from my probation officer on January 1st. This would have been '04 when he showed up to my house and took me to jail. And so I spent some time in the Davis County jail, and then basically graduated to the work center. Both not fun experiences. They're not supposed to be fun. It's jail, and their customer service is terrible in these places. But I think that's by design, right? So no room service, nothing like that. And so I spent some time in the work center, and then graduated into a program, a county-run program. And so, and I'm of the belief that any program that you do what they teach you, you will stay sober. From county-run funded programs all the way to the Malibu programs, the expensive ones. If you do what they teach you, you can stay sober. So oftentimes people will say, well, what is your recovery rate at Renaissance Ranch? And I always say 100%. And they're like, 100%? How's that possible? And I say, if you do what's taught at the ranch, you'll stay sober. I've only seen it hundreds of times with guys. Like, if you follow the suggestions, that you will stay sober. And so this program that I'd entered into was a little bit of a scary program. It was kind of a halfway between jail and regular programs. And I got in there and met this guy, and he had just gotten out of prison. And then for some reason I had suggested we go to a meeting one night, and he didn't like that. I didn't know that he didn't like it, but then later on he expressed his displeasure at me, saying we should go to a meeting. And his name was Bullet, and I only knew his name was Bullet because it was tattooed across his chest, Bullet. And I never had the nerve to tell him that Bullet actually had 2 L's, and it was misspelled. It had 1 L in there, but I didn't want to tell him that. And so as a result, I didn't get as much out of the program, because now I was fearful of Bullet and what might happen, and just did my time in that program and got out. And so I had some sobriety. I think back 2 years, but if I'm honest, maybe 6 to 8 months. But I would have considered that more white knuckling before the addiction sort of reared its ugly head. So the one thing about addiction or alcoholism is it never goes away, but you can kind of keep it in check, if you know what I mean, or keep it under, manage it is the best way to describe it, is managing the symptoms. And so what's interesting is companies, these big Fortune 500 companies, They pay millions of dollars to find out where their flaws are in their companies, with surveys, with phone calls, with research, market research, to find out their weak spots. And I tell addicts, alcoholics all the time, we actually have it made in the shade, because we know for us that alcohol and drugs are a liability. And the good thing is we can build our strength around that liability that we have. And Carl Jung talked about this. He talked about this idea of the shadow. And what the shadow is all human beings have a light side and a dark side. So it's like the yin and yang. And so to know that you're shadow, to know what you're capable of, it can be powerful for you, because then you can build your defenses around that and work on that. But for me, when I got out of that program, again, about 8 months of sobriety, and then just quit doing the things, everything that they always say, quit calling a sponsor, quit going to meetings, just thinking I could do this on my own. And then the addiction slowly crept back. After a matter of just probably a year or two, I was off to the races. And with the addiction to opioids, I was able to keep it together for quite a while. But then pretty soon that began to run its course and ran out. And then I switched to alcohol. And I still remember the day when I was dope sick on my bed, and I had to be to work at 1 o'clock, and this is on a Tuesday. And I would be dope sick for the weekend. I would kind of sort of come back to life on Monday, and then by Tuesday morning I could finally shower, go back to work. And this pattern continued for months, if not years, of brief periods of using opiates, terrible withdrawals, sober for a couple weeks, and then back into the cycle again, just over and over and over again. And so I remember the day I was laying on the couch, and to this day I struggle watching daytime TV because of this, because I would lay down there on my couch and watch daytime programming while I was dope sick. So anytime, even today when it comes on, I have a weird kind of response to that, because it reminds me of that terrible experience. But I was laying down there watching the History Channel or something, and I remember thinking, man, I look up at the clock and it's 11:30 exactly, and I have to be to work at 1. And I'm like, I feel horrible. I can't even get up to take a shower, but I have to go to work in an hour and a half. I've got to do something. And then I got this idea, and it's kind of like in The Grinch when it says he gets this awful, wonderful idea that why don't I just try a little alcohol? Maybe that will help me just so I can get up, take a shower, and make it to work. And so I got the strength up to get up, shower, get dressed, scrounge some money together, went down to the local gas station, went in, because I'm not even an alcohol drinker, so I don't even know what I'm looking for, but I know I'm looking for beer. So I find a 6-pack of beer, walk up, I purchase, I go out to the car, I begin drinking it. I can't stand the taste, but what I'm after is the feeling, right? And so in AA literature, they talk about the temporary comfort of oblivion, and that's what I was looking for. So not a social drinker. I didn't go to clubs or bars. It was this altered state I was after. And so I sat there and drank 2, 3, 4, 5, and finally drank all 6 beers. And then I had that warm rush that alcoholics get of like, man, where have you been all my life? Like, this is way easier. I can go down to the gas station, get enough alcohol and drink, and then go to work. And I thought, okay, well, that's good for that day. I'm not going to keep doing it. Next day, same thing before work, go down, get a 6-pack. And then pretty soon it turned into after work. And then pretty soon later on the evening. And then pretty soon it was during the night. And then pretty soon it was just around the clock, where I was constantly having to drink alcohol. And I remember being surprised about 2 weeks in at how fast my body had become addicted to alcohol. And when I wasn't drinking, I would already get the shakes and I would feel that withdrawal from alcohol. So it was super, that scared me, and because I was like, that was weird. I've never experienced that before. And so I kind of stayed at this point of just drinking all the time, 24 hours a day. And so that only lasted, and I say thank goodness, about 3 to 4 months, because it came to an end for me faster. Alcohol really pulled me down very, very fast, which I'm grateful for hindsight-wise, or I don't know where I would be today. I don't know what would have happened. And so during this process of drinking and not drinking and trying to work, it's a very miserable existence. And later on, I would learn that what step 1 is about, powerlessness and unmanageability. My life had become unmanageable, and now I was powerless over the alcohol, but I couldn't stop drinking, which means logically I understand, and the definition of powerlessness is the continued use despite negative consequences. So I knew it wasn't going to turn out well, but I could not drink. And so I was in this cycle over and over again. And I remember I would go buy alcohol, and this is the one thing that kept me from thinking I was a true alcoholic, because I didn't go to the liquor store. I wasn't like pawning stuff, any of that stuff. I was just drinking beer, but 36, like 42 beers in one sitting, but I wasn't an alcoholic. And this was the narrative I told myself for a long time. And so I remember on one occasion sitting, and this was the point that kind of changed my life. So this is March 21st, 2013. I pull up to my drinking spot, which was in a car wash at a gas station. And I'd always park third from the left, and no one ever was washing their cars. It's March, February, March, I did this. I would go there and drink. And the reason why I chose that spot was I could drive back home the back way. It was only about a mile to my house, so I didn't have to go out any main roads, anything like that. And so on this particular night, it was a Thursday night. I just got off work, called my wife and said, I'm staying late. And at that point, she knew something was up and we weren't getting along. And so I went to the gas station, bought, I think it was a 36 pack, parked in the car wash again, and began my routine, which I had been doing for night after night after night. And I remember beginning to drink and drink and drink, and then being emotional and saying a prayer of like, man, God, like you have to help me. Like I can't stop drinking. Like this is insane, and I'm doing it over and over and again, and I can't stop. And I'm praying and I'm praying and I'm still drinking and praying. And then all of a sudden I look up in my rearview mirror and I see a police car pull up. In the city where I live, there are black cars and they're black tinted windows. So I see this police car pull up in the car wash, and you'd be surprised how sober you can get once you see the police car pull up. He didn't have his lights on, but I knew it was a cop car. And then I thought, oh my gosh. And then I immediately said, this is not what I was praying for. I know I was asking for help, but I was asking for that kind of help. Like that's not what I was looking for. So I waited about 30 seconds because I didn't see the cop get out of his car. And I was hoping, like in Jurassic Park, that his vision was based on movement. So I held really still in the seat and didn't move. And what seemed about, to me, 5 minutes was probably really about 20 seconds. I panicked and I thought I'm going to slowly start my vehicle and drive out and go home. And as soon as I start the vehicle, then he flipped his lights on. So he was clearly sitting out there for a while. And so I pulled around and he pulled me over, got out of the car, brought me to the front, did the field sobriety tests. And then and this is probably not what happened, but I felt like they were just playing games with me because they're like hop on one foot, like do the moonwalk. And I'm like, wait a second, I don't think these are field sobriety tests. So then I just admitted, I'm like, yeah, I'm drunk. I'm like, yeah, we know. So put me in the back of the squad car, that kind of thing. And then we get to the police station and I get in and they give you your one phone call, which I guess they do like in the movie. So I asked for my one phone call and I called my wife and she hangs up on me. She's super mad. And so then I called my other great enablers at that time, my parents, and convinced my parents to come bail me out. And at that time, what all good alcoholics do is we build this, they call it the Cartman drama triangle. It's kind of a trifecta. So I have my wife kind of over here, my parents over here, and I'm kind of the circus master. And if I can keep these two parties at war with each other, then I can play off both, right? So I can play my parents off to my mom off to my parents, and it kind of keeps the addiction fueled that way because you're kind of working this triangle. And so I kind of blamed everything on my wife at that time. My parents like, yeah, we'll come pick you up. I go back to their house. I convince them I'm not that drunk, and this is probably now 1 o'clock in the morning, and they let me take their car. And in hindsight, that was probably not a smart thing to do because I was still pretty intoxicated. But the one thing about alcoholics is you'd be surprised at what you remember at the alcoholic levels that you're at. And so I was still coherent enough, but still very intoxicated. And they lent me their truck. And so I remember pulling out of their cul-de-sac, and I'm like, this is awful. And now I got to go home and face my wife and the kids. And instead of driving straight to my house, I caught myself making a right. And I'm driving down, and I'm like, where are you going? What are you doing? It's like, you need to go home. So I'm having this conversation with myself. You need to go home. And all I can think is, I need to drink. I need more alcohol. I need to drink. And I'm like, this is crazy. So logically, I'm like, this doesn't make sense. I need to go home. But then the powerlessness, what I learned later was powerlessness. I drove straight back to the same gas station where I was arrested just 4 hours earlier and purchased more alcohol. Now, if that's not insane or madness, I don't know what is. And had I been pulled over, I would have gotten a second DUI in 4 hours, and that would have really been bad. 6 months in jail, the legal sentence. But again, the insanity, it was just impossible. So during this process, I would start, my wife and family would approach me. They say, hey, you need to get some help. And They would take me up to the emergency room. I would go into the detox for a couple of days. I would sober up, swear it off. I'm never going to do it again. Leave, come back again the next week. And so this happened probably 4 or 5 times. This pattern of going to the ER, because I was drinking at this point to alcoholic poisoning levels, where it was so intoxicating that soon your body or your liver just shuts down. And so this was probably the 5th time we'd gone to the ER. Now the funny thing about that is every time we went to the ER, it was the same ER doctor. And I remember when I would walk in, I'm like, oh, it's this guy again. I'm like, do you guys work any different shifts? Like, I get the same guy every time. So each time I went in, he would sort of, not really yell at me, but he would basically say, hey, this is ridiculous. You're poisoning yourself. You're going to go to detox. And I'd give him the same spiel. You need to get help. I would agree. So we would go, then I'd go to detox, come back. So this occasion, I think it's the 5th time, within about 5 weeks. I remember I come in again. He's like, oh, okay. And he sees me, like they get used to seeing the regular patients. Lays me down on the bed. Then he comes in, and he's all serious this time. The first few times he was more compassionate, kind of understanding, hey, you need to get help. But I could see he's not playing this time. He asked my wife and kids to leave the room. He's like, can you guys go to the waiting room? So they leave to the waiting room, and he goes over and gets this chart off the table. Then he sits down on the little doctor chairs and wheels over to me, and he starts showing me my statistics. And he's like, okay, here you were this day when you came in, your blood alcohol levels here you're on this day, here's number 3, here's number 4. And he's like, do you see this right here, what this is? He's like, this is increasing. He's like, so each time you've come in, you're almost doubling your alcohol levels. And he's like, and here's the scary thing, at this level, when you came in the first time, would basically put down like an elephant. Like an elephant should pass out from that and not being able to function. This one, the 3rd one, he's like, would kill a regular human being. Alcohol at this level would just shut their liver down and their kidneys and everything. They would die. He's like, but here you are almost twice that, and we're having a conversation, and you're remembering everything I'm saying to you. And he's like, what's happening is you're entering into what's known as alcohol poisoning, which means you're still aware enough that you can continue to drink, but your body's at poison levels. And he's like, what happens then is you just basically die. You'll just die of alcohol poisoning. He's like, you'll fall asleep and you just won't wake up. And he says, if you want to die, that's your business. Go do it by yourself, but don't drag, your wife and your kids down with you. Just go someplace else and kill yourself if that's what you want to do, because that's what you're doing, essentially. And then he says, I never want to see you back here again, and if you do, I will refuse treatment to you. Got up and walked out. And I was like, man, what a wiener. Like, who says that to people? Like, nasty and just mean. But it was that moment of truth. And here's the weird thing is I often look back at that situation and actually hear my higher power speaking through the doctor, telling me how it is. It's speaking the truth. And often they say, the truth hurts, or the truth sets you free. And it was that moment where I was like, oh man, like this is serious. This is getting serious for me. So I went down and did the detox. Again, wanted to go home, called my wife, and my wife says, we found a place for you. And I'm like, I'm not going, just the normal alcoholic stuff. And so I'm waiting in the lobby of this place, and this car pulls up. And then I notice it's my LDS bishop steps out of the driver's seat, and my wife. And so they're walking up, so now I know I'm in trouble because my bishop is there. And so they come in, and he's super positive and about the situation, and says, we're gonna take you to this wonderful place. And they get me in this car seat. I'm sitting next to the bishop. My wife gets in the back, and the whole ride down, it's about an hour and a half from where I was in detox to where the ranch is. And so the bishop's giving me the hard sell about the ranch, Renaissance Ranch. She's like, there's horses and there's chickens, and it's like a farm setting, and you're going to do activities. And he's just kind of giving me the hard sell about the ranch and everything. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, yeah, sure, this is what we're doing. And then I remember when I was younger, so we used to have dogs, and our dogs would get old, and then they would disappear, and they would go away. And then my parents would say, I'd say, what happened to Bosco? And they say, oh, we took him to the ranch. Don't worry, there's chickens and horses, and he's going to do activities. And I'm like, oh, cool. And then later I would realize that they were taking Bosco to put him down. And so I had this thought in my mind, like, wait a second. my wife and Bishop are going to drive me to a quarry, soprano style, and shoot me in the back of the head and roll me up in a carpet and basically leave me in a quarry somewhere. I'm like, this is the scenario that's kind of playing through my mind that's going to happen. So I finally say I agree to go and everything. And then where the ranch is located is a little bit east of Kennecott Copper Mine. So you go down Bangerter Highway to get to the ranch, and you can see the mine off in the distance. And my poor Bishop now is giving me statistics about Kennecott Copper. You know, it's the largest man-made thing from space. I don't know if any of this is true, but it's the largest man-made thing from space. He's telling me how much stuff they pull out of there the whole time. I'm like, I don't really care as he's telling me all this stuff. And so we get off the exit, we turn in, we pull up to the ranch. You can see the big, the Jurassic Park style gate kind of stuff with the sign. And you turn in, and at this time when I was there, they had gotten rid of the horses and had 2 alpacas. So we're making the left in, and we look over to the right, and these alpacas are sitting there. And my bishop says to me, he's like, I don't think those are horses. And so I was like, yeah, Bishop, they're not horses. Clearly, this is not going to be the experience that you've just told me about. And so we pull up with that great horseshoe driveway at the ranch, and we go into the front. And now my wife's not talking to me. She's super mad. And at the time, there was one of the owners that was at the ranch and my bishop, and they bring me in, and we're sitting in the front room of the ranch, and my bishop and now one of the previous directors were there talking, and now I think they did it so I could hear them, but then I didn't think they were, and I'm sitting in the corner, and the bishop says, well, what do we do if he doesn't want to stay? And then the former director says, I'll give him some money, and we'll take him to the track station or the park, and he can go, he can be homeless or live where he wants to go. And I was like, oh, how could you guys do this to me? And then they come over again and they sit down. They're like, okay, so what do you think? And I'm like, I don't really have any choice. So yeah, clearly one of my character defects is laziness, and being homeless seemed a lot harder than being at the ranch. And so I was taking the path of least resistance, and I'm like, fine, I'll stay here. If I don't have any choice, I don't have to try to find a place to sleep tonight. So the bishop leaves, but I remember having a weird sensation when I was walking up to the stairs of the ranch. And the only way that I could explain that experience was when you see the films of people that survive a shipwreck, and they're out at sea in this terrible storm, and the ship gets destroyed, and they're clinging to a log, and they finally make their way to shore, and they're kind of coming up on shore, and then they have that moment where you see them collapse in the sand, and they're just exhausted, and they're too exhausted to climb up any further up, and the water's sort of hitting them on their legs, and they pass out there as they've grabbed land. And that was the feeling that I had when I walked through the doors of the ranch. It was a weird sensation, one of the worst days of my life, but one of the best days of my life. I had felt I had survived this horrific experience, and I could finally surrender or turn it over. And it was just like this burden had been lifted, where I had no longer had to fight. And I often describe my experience prior to that of being a pilot on an airplane, and the plane is on fire, and you're driving it, you can see the mountain getting closer and closer, but you cannot eject from the pilot's seat. Like, I know this is not going to end well, but I cannot get out of the plane. And that was my experience about a month before getting into the ranch, of saying to myself, this is going to turn out badly, but I cannot stop it. I don't know how to get out of this plane, so to speak. And so that feeling of getting to the ranch, of this sense of surrender, and like the horrific ordeal was over with, and now the ordeal of healing began. And that's kind of what it was for me on that day. And then, as always, when you get into rehab, nobody wants to be there. You really shouldn't want to be there, and that's okay, because we don't usually get into rehabs on winning streaks. And so I would vacillate between, I want to go home, I should be here, I want to go home. And I remember first, about a weekend, we were in a group room, and the house manager, they'll do from time to time a check-in with the new guy. He's, how are you doing, that kind of stuff. And we're sitting there, and they're kind of going around, and I'm kind of keeping to myself. And the house manager at that time, he says, let's check in with the new guy. How are you doing? And I'm just like, oh, I'm not doing good. And he's like, well, what's going on? I'm like, I just shouldn't be here. And he's like, well, where should you be? And I'm like, well, thanks for asking. I should be home, because I'm a father, I'm a provider, I'm a husband, I'm all these things. and this is really hurting my family being here, so I should probably go home. And I remember he sat there and he said, he's like, did you ever think that they might need a break from you? And I remember going like, why would they need a break from? And there's another movie moment where the camera zooms in, the room spins around, and this like aha moment. And I was like, wait a second. So are you saying that this is as bad for them as it is for me? And he's like, it's probably worse. I'm like, oh my gosh. This whole thing was like, this is bad on them as well? And he's like, probably wife and kids. He's like, so your wife talked to me? I'm like, no, my wife won't talk to me. My kids won't talk to me. My wife changed the lock. He's like, oh, also, didn't you lose your job? I'm like, yeah, I lost my job. I mean, other than that, everything was going pretty good for me. Lost my license. I'm like, but yeah, I was actually doing well. And just that thought of maybe they need a break from me just was a paradigm shift to see things for the first time from another person's perspective. And for me, one of my personal beliefs is that when we cross over, we get into the next life or whatever that looks like, that we'll often see life through the lens of our loved ones, and we'll see things from different perspectives. Because I think sometimes our view is skewed between our perception of things, of life, and our experiences that we see. But we see it from another's perspective, we can see it for what it really is. And that was that spiritual awakening moment for me, to look and say, man, this was probably hard on my wife and my kids and the stuff that they've been through. And that was a turning point where I was like, wow, like, yeah, I need this. I really need to be here. And then about a week after that, we had a group on the shame-based family system, or the family systems lecture. And the therapist is up there on the board, and she's writing the stuff, and she's saying, here's the mom, here's the dad, here's the kid, the sister, and these systems and these roles that we play in family systems. And I start seeing my mom and my dad and my brother, my sister, and me. And I remember thinking to myself, either this woman is clairvoyant and she knows my family, or there's something to this, something is going on here. And it was, I must watch a lot of movies because it was another movie moment for me. So I'll reference The Matrix here. So I often refer to this therapist as Morpheus for me, because it was that moment of either take the red pill or the blue pill. So you can go back to life as you know it, and what you think this reality is, or I'm about to show you a new way. And so luckily I chose the new way, but I remember walking back to my room and actually laying on the floor because my head at that point was spinning. It was like seeing a UFO, or like seeing Bigfoot, or something strange that people tell you doesn't exist, and a different perspective on life. And suddenly you see this in your life and you're like, everything that I knew was a lie or not accurate up until this point. And there was more going on than just that I was an alcoholic and I was a drug addict. There was something going on within the family system. And that was another paradigm shift moment for me to go, wow, something is going on with this. And there was a change that took place. And so the hope is with rehab and treatment is you get in the first 2 weeks, you don't want to be there, which is normal. 4 weeks, you kind of get into the rhythm. 6 weeks, you're like, I can't believe I have to get ready to leave. And so for me, I really just embraced the program. And by the time it came to get out to go to the sober living, it was a little bit tough experience for me to leave, because I had just learned so much about my family system, about myself. But what they'll often say is treatment is basically discovery. When you get out, that's when recovery begins. That's when the rubber meets the road. You put all the things that you learned into practice, and then hopefully begin to work your program and work that in. So for me, I always felt that I had, from a very young age, I've had kind of what they would describe as a childlike faith and a belief in things and seeing God in my life. But I can say that I really didn't go through what they would call a conversion process until I went through my alcoholism and really basically the acid test to what I needed in my life. And I'll tell a story. So the last time I ever drank alcohol was April 15th, 2013. It was a Monday. It was also happened to be the day of the Boston Marathon bombing, because I would listen to the radio when I would sit in my car and drink. So it's weird for me, like Slumdog Millionaire. I've got historical references with my story. For some reason, I remember things that are happening and then where I'm at in my life. So I remember listening to that on the radio, and my protocol was I would get the alcohol, and I quit going to where my usual spot was the gas station, because my wife and family had found out that's where my car was, and so I had to find a new spot. So my new spot was an old crappy Binion Craft parking lot, and kind of a crappy part of town, by another old car wash. I don't know what the theme is there, but by another old car wash and an old like lawyer's office, kind of run down building. And I would park in this corner, and the reason being is I could sit in the car and drink, but I had full view if cars were approaching or a cop car came, things like that. So I would be able to watch and see this. And I pull up, and I'm drinking at this point, and I think I've been drinking all day. And I remember my wife trying to get a hold of me, people trying to call me, so finally turning my phone off. And I remember sitting in that parking lot and just thinking to myself, like, man, this has got to end. And drinking and asking God, like, man, why don't you just, take my life? Just remove me from this. Is miserable. I can't do this any longer. And I couldn't stop drinking. And I sat in that old 2001 Toyota Camry, in a dark parking lot, probably the lowest I'd been in my entire life, wanting to die, but not having the courage to take my own life, thankfully, but just asking God, like, what is the purpose? Like, I can't stop. This is going to kill me. I wish it was just over with. And I remember having this feeling, which is kind of hard to describe or talk about, because when people say, well, you were drinking or you were intoxicated, but it wasn't even that. Like, this feeling transcended even that. And this sense of peace came over me. And I felt as if the God of my understanding was in the passenger seat. And basically put his arm around me and said, hey, it's going to be all right. Don't worry, everything's going to work out. And then my phone that was dead rang. And it was my wife. And she asked me where I was. And I told her, and she drove right over and picked me up. And we had left from that parking lot back up to the detox center where I detoxed. And the next day, April 16th, I was on my way into Renaissance Ranch. And the cool thing about that experience is sitting in that old crappy parking lot and that old beat up 2001 Toyota Corolla was a God moment for me that I couldn't see at the time, but I can see today. And I went back to that spot on the 5-year anniversary of my sobriety birth date and sat there and just had another spiritual experience, that this crappy parking lot next to a dumpster in an old crappy part of town by an old nasty car wash was my burning bush moment. It was my sacred grove. And in my spiritual eyes, I could see God leaving his throne and sending angels, seen and unseen, to help me. And so wherever you're at, like, I know what that feels like, to be in that spot where you don't see a way out. But I promise you that God is with you and that he will send both angels seen and unseen for your aid. And as they say in recovery, don't give up before the miracle happens. I know you can't see it now in that darkness, But in hindsight, he was there with me in that car. He was the one that gave me that hope that everything was going to be okay. And he was one that gave me the courage to finally to make that step to finally surrender and turn that over to him. And so that spot today, I'll take my kids to. And I have a picture of it that I keep, that I look at oftentimes as a place where I met God, and it wasn't in a temple, and it wasn't in a church, and it wasn't in any of those places, but it was at a low point in my life. So I promise you that though it may seem like there's no way out, I promise you that there is a way out. And there's a way that God was telling me that there is a better way. He was saying, Matt, I don't judge you or condemn you for drinking or using. I get it. But let me show you that there's a better way. And that's what recovery has taught me.